Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 483rd New Social Environment. I'm Nick, the Special Projects Editor here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation with Laurie Anderson and Paul D. Miller. We're thrilled to welcome poet Charles Theonia here, who will read to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat in just a moment for a living document of resources and actions that we'll be posting. And now to introduce today's guest and host. As a Grammy Award-winning musician, performer, writer, and artist, Laurie Anderson has an international reputation as an artist who combines the traditions of the avant-garde with popular culture. Anderson's theatrical works combine a variety of media, including performance, music, poetry, sculpture, opera, anthropological investigations, and linguistic games to elicit emotional reactions. She is currently the Charles Eliot Norton Professor of Poetry at Harvard University, and her current exhibition, Laurie Anderson, The Weather, is on view at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C. through March 31st of 2022. And our host today, composer, multimedia artist, and writer Paul D. Miller, aka DJ Spooky, immerses audiences in a blend of genres, global culture, and environmental and social issues. Miller has collaborated with an array of recording artists, including Metallica, Chuck D, Steve Reich, and Yoko Ono. His 2018 album, DJ Spooky Presents Phantom Dancehall, debuted at number 3 on Billboard Reggae. He is an editor-at-large here at the Brooklyn Rail. And without further ado, Paul, over to you.
All right. First and foremost, I just want to say, given that it seems like the political context, Russia has troops on the border of Ukraine. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There's a tremendous amount of political tension with sort of the post-World War II order, whether it be China about to seemingly level havoc on Taiwan, or Putin, or we're in this era where authoritarian regimes have really created a crisis of democracy. So it was with real pleasure that I went to go see Laurie's show at the Hirshhorn. And it was kind of a powerful reminder of how language and how we linguistically frame things has been, kind of, for lack of a word, weaponized in this era of misinformation and algorithmic narrative and sort of computational propaganda. So Laurie, one of the things that I found really compelling about your show is that it gave us an overview of your work that in a certain sense, you're very prolific. So it's been always, and you migrate between a lot of different flavors and styles, which it's incredibly beautiful, refreshing. I highly recommend anybody who wants to just feel like there's some hope for humanity in this sort of pandemic era. Highly recommend checking out. So I have a fun story that I want to just bounce off of you from a little bit of your earlier days. And you have a studio on Canal Street. And we were talking about, there's an early piece called Drum Dance, where you took apart a drum machine and put the sensors and the elements of the drum machine throughout a suit. And that's when you walk into the exhibition, that's one of the first things you see. But there's a famous story that amongst musicians that people sort of, said Laurie was walking around Canal Street and saw an old drum machine sort of in the trash or in a bin someplace, and took it apart and mixed it with her clothing. Can you tell me about that story? And I guess, Nick, if you have an image, it's kind of her wearing a white suit. And it's one of my favorite pieces of yours. It's called Drum Dance. And if you could tell us the story, is it true? Is that?
Well, first of all, Paul, it's really nice to be here. Oh yeah, there it is you can see it through a doorway. Oh no, that's the other end of the show. So it's on the opposite end of the slideshow. You'll find Drum Dance. But hello from Canal Street, by the way. I still have a studio there. And when you were speaking of today and what's going on, it is amazing how we're all about to experience the so-called bomb cyclone snow. How can you weaponize the weather? Well, give it another name, like a bomb cyclone. How did just snowflakes turn into a bomb? Anyway, they're slowly falling here on Canal Street, where I still have a place, and I really love Canal Street. Paul, the time you were talking about was in the 70s, 80s. It was a little bit like New York has become in the last couple of years, kind of deserted. And Canal Street was very famous for having all sorts of bins of stuff. This was not the trash, but it was I found an old Lynn drum machine, little thing in one of the bins. And I pulled it out and I just thought, well, I'm going to try to fix it. So I took it apart and it had 8 little sounds, a bass drum, all really tinny, claps, a rim shot, and but packed into this little drum machine, cheap drum machine, were the sensors because you play the drums like this, were really long cables. I thought, why are they having super long cables for these sensors? And I thought, you could play the drums way out here. So that's why I thought, I think I'm just going to build a suit so you can put the sensor for the heart, the bass drum on the heart, doom, 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 and then so the claps would be in the hands and the knee would be the snare drum. So you'd become a kind of human drum. So a lot of the show is about the body, and it's about scale. So that opens the show, and it's a really satisfying thing to play, so that you can make a very loud and cheesy sound with this suit. I used it in a film called Home of the Brave, and at various places on tour around that time.
Well, as a kind of a touchstone of some of the DNA of being able to using found artifacts that are embodied with code, drum machines, amusingly enough, are essentially just code meets sound. And I thought that it was a nice sort of platform to begin the conversation, because not only by taking it apart and sort of putting it in your clothing and then improvising with dance, it reminded me, when you think about the way that you have incorporated violin, and you've also had many different technologies go into how you approach composing and performing, the exhibition really embodied a lot of the elements that I felt make your work so powerful and resonant with our time. And the other thing I wanted to mention is you enjoyed doing a series when you were just a young baby. That there's a fun series where you went to sleep in public. And there were these kind of, you documented it. And so there's very fun photos of Laurie sleeping in a courtroom, or Laurie sleeping, in all sorts of quirky, radically unexpected spaces. Could you walk us through that a little bit? Because I think that's because sleeping in public and dreaming and then sort of documenting the dreams. These are, I'm going somewhere with this. And I think would love to hear your story with that. And then we'll kind of unpack it as it relates to the exhibition.
Okay, well, I guess first of all, I was attracted to taboo, and public sleeping is a taboo. Nobody wants you to sleep in public. If you're slipping down and you're on the train or something, wake up, you're so vulnerable. So I was attracted to that idea of being vulnerable in public. And also I just wanted to know what the barriers are between your sleeping mind and your waking mind, which is a border that I'm always trying to cross as a writer. And so I thought, what will the sounds that I hear or the feeling that I have when I'm sleeping in public, let it influence my dreams? So I did a lot of I went a lot of places like Night Court, like a very noisy, chaotic place. And they didn't, I was successful only one night in Night Court, because usually you're free to go to Night Court, of course. And it's a very interesting scene. I spent a lot of time at Night Court just looking at cases that would come in. And also as a night owl, I liked the kind of weird company of justice being administered in the middle of the night. Anyway, so I spent time there, but the court officer would always continually come in and try to wake me up. There's no sleeping. There's no sleeping. You have to go. And don't come back tomorrow either, like yesterday. But, you know, they can't really prevent you. So I would say it's pretty inconclusive. Like, did I find out whether the sound of the ocean when I was sleeping on the beach in Coney Island, did that influence the dreams? It was, let's say, inconclusive.
Inconclusive. Well, and you in your current Norton lecture series at Harvard, you had also mentioned that you're into this night kind of right at the edge of dreams, and that seems to be a recurring motif. You had wanted to do a radio show where you would be sort of DJing and then playing experimental music, and then music for people to sleep to or people could kind of respond to, right between it's sort of what it's technically called the hypnagogic state, where you're right at the edge of dreaming. But a lot of your poetry kind of circles back to that kind of that ambiguous space between the dream and the reality. You know, there's a famous Chinese myth where a philosopher says he's dreaming about being a butterfly, dreaming about being a philosopher. And that kind of layered relationship to reality seems to be kind of resonant with your work. Nick, can we flip one or two of the other slides? Because I want to just kind of have the audience see some of the Hirshhorn. Okay, so this is the citizens piece. There's a lot of ways that Laurie's work, I think, gives us some tools to unpack our contemporary moment, mainly by how poetry becomes, for lack of a better word, kind of a tool for critical thinking. And Laurie, one of these are smaller chair pieces that they're very, like I remember Tony Orsler also has a similar approach of the kind of projection on small. These, regretfully, the audience, you might not be able to see. These are very small. Like, could you walk us through this one too?
Yeah, I did the first one of these in 1975, and yeah, Tony was one of my students then, and and I thought, how am I going to get? My problem was, how do I get stories into a gallery? Let's say, who's going to sit around and listen to a story? So I thought I really have you have to be pulled into a story. So I thought if I have a really small storyteller, you might have to go down. So these are really tiny. They're just film projected onto little clay figures. And so since 75, I've done this in a few different ways. And what happens is you do get kind of drawn into the scale. It's so great, by the way, that you can't really get the gist of this piece on Zoom. It's so great to do a show where you actually have to go there to see it and to experience scale, because there's also a very, very large work along these lines as well. And so this is a piece called Citizens, and they are a bunch of mostly my friends sharpening knives. And so you come into this room and you just have this, like, it's quite creepy, but it's this kind of, it sounds like ice skating. And speaking of which, if anybody's around in New York on Monday, we're having an ice skating party at Rockefeller Rink. It's Phil Glass's 85th birthday. Everyone is invited. You don't need a ticket, unlike what it says on their website. So I'm DJing this event, and it is, I have listened to so much of Phil Glass's music in the last couple of weeks. I mean, I love his music beyond, and I can tell you with a lot of assurance, there is nothing that Phil has ever written that you can't skate to. So come to the rink and celebrate this. And it's also a party that's not going to be canceled. You know, everything's canceled. You know, this is an ice skating party. It's going to happen even in probably a cyclone bomb storm, probably. So anyway, that was just a side invitation to anyone who's around with 7 o'clock until 10. Come by Rockefeller Rink in Midtown. and bring your skates if you're a skater. So anyway, these people are making this actually beautiful, very musical sound of knife sharpening, but it is very creepy, I have to say. It's about, there's something about a lot of people doing the same thing when they're not in an orchestra, you know, that's a little scary.
And what's beautiful about it as well is the sharpening of the knives is generally, you know, there's a long layer of metaphor and, you know, history, whether it be, you know, Caesar being assassinated, or the Night of the Long Knives, which was right at the beginning of, you know, when Hitler took power and so on. There's that political dimension, but still a kind of again, a sort of poetic low. And that's what it's even your voice has that. I mean, when I was listening to the Norton lectures, I remembered that you have this kind of intense Midwestern accent, that's this kind of affect, kind of that it's considered the voice of news. And a lot of the news in the 70s and 80s was always kind of done with that Midwestern centrist accent. And I've always wanted to ask you, like, how do you feel that that affects, because the written text versus the dimensionalization that you deal with when you're grappling with certain, your work is very political. There's, I mean, there's another piece, I'm not sure if we have the slide for it, where you were at the armory with someone who'd been held at Guantanamo Bay. There's been a couple other pieces where there's a kind of an exploration of again, this sort of political tension about how the construction of mass psychosis can be kind of explored with poetry. And again, Nick, if you want to maybe keep some of the slides, I don't know if we always have to have the same. It's just gives the audience a little bit of the sensibility. Each room was kind of a dimensionalization of Laurie's poetry and the process that the poems kind of evoke. And that's, there's an infamous phrase that Laurie has in one of the pieces where it says language is a virus. It's kind of an interior design of a kind of a chalk, grit and graffiti-esque kind of vibe to it. Laurie, do you want to talk about some of the linguistic element? Yeah, there we go. This is a room immersed in language, and it's fragments of your own work and appropriations of other poems and small fragments of text. Do you want to riff on that for a moment? Because I think it's a really nice.
Yeah, this is a room that I wanted to make it like walk-in comic book filled with words, because the back to this Midwestern thing, it's the words that I use are, if there's an accent in a font, it's just like very plain. I'm not using exotic language generally. So these stories are really, really simple. They're based on these four images in this work. This is a very large, it's the size of a small Volkswagen, black raven. And this is connected to a number of stories about birds and their function as messengers. And in this particular case, he's sort of surrounded in this kind of arc, stories about the arc, which is the topic of the opera that I'm working on. So these are stories that are moving into that other language of song. And anyway, the raven, in terms of the story of the ark, of course, was the bird that was sent out first. And I love the story of that bird, because he was, you know, he just disappeared. He's like a void. No one ever heard from him again. They sent him out. He was not like the dove who comes back like, hey guys, it's all good news. It's all like, oh, I got the olive branch. I'm the UN symbol. It's all right. It's all good. But the black raven took off, found who knows what, nothing, never heard from him. That was a very interesting, let's say, message. Burroughs is hiding around in this language somewhere, and his, of course, played with his words in lots of ways, and language is a virus from outer space is one of my all-time favorite quotes. And in our, this is a poorly repaired canoe that's leaking. And this is a series of anagrams like canoe and ocean, there's a bunch of those kind of words around. Anyway, back to language as a virus. Of course, now we know virus is a language, which is part of the reason we're in the Zoom world right now, is we can't crack that. We can't crack that code that the virus just keeps changing like language. It just keeps. I guess there's another Omicron, right? There's a second one, B, something B. No?
Yeah, there's a newer one that they're just releasing the news about it, which is amusingly enough, the permutation of the way the virus works is, again, Burroughs always felt that was about the way language restructures the mind as it infects with words. And then obviously he felt that there was kind of a tremendous kind of power in the manipulation of language. And the beauty of your work in this room, and I want the audience to remember, this is about a scale. Like you walk into a room and you're in this kind of floating cloud of words. It's really beautiful. And Laurie, from what I've a bird whispered, so to speak, that you had been painting up until almost the opening, and you even there were paintings that you I guess you and Julian Schnabel were collaborating on. We can get to those in a little bit, but that's the next, I think, 2 rooms over from this. But as someone who's walking through the exhibition, as a kind of, I remember the people from the museum who were very kind and very helpful. They had said that you didn't want to call it a retrospective. These are elements of work that you're kind of doing a live remix, like you're kind of pulling bits and pieces from your own archive and then updating, transforming. Do you, how, like, I have so many questions, so I'm hoping, like, in the 70s, you have people like you, Brian Eno, Namjoon Paik, obviously David Byrne was just graduating from RISD. You had been at, I believe it was Barnard/Columbia. It seemed like there was a scene in the air. A lot of people call it No New York. How did that affect your sensibility? Because at that time, it seems incredibly fertile, that late 70s, early 80s. Even the new wave haircut is now kind of coming back. We have this retrospective nostalgia going on, but it's there's something that's incredibly resonant even now from that time period. Can you talk about a little bit of the scene at that time, because you were part of that kind of movement, but from a very independent approach?
Well, I hope some of that spirit's coming back, because that was a really interesting time to be an artist and be a young artist, and kind of there was, you know, most of us were, you know, could never, for example, imagine ever making a living from being an artist. So that's number one. So we were free in a way that was really kind of still left over from the 60s, I think, you know, of this idea that I'm just going to dance down a road. I don't know where it's going. I'm going to be free. And we had utter disdain for people who knew what they wanted and were getting jobs. You know, we're like, what idiots wanted to forge ahead in some kind of, I don't know, cultural, just world of status or something. It was really funky, and it was really wonderful and borderless kind of. So you could do all kinds of different kinds of things, and no one would push you into like one way or another, because it didn't really matter what category you were in. So that was the kind of the world I grew up in as an artist. It was. I'm happy to know that you seem to think it's coming back. In what way do you think that? I mean, why are you thinking that might be?
Oh, wow. Well,
I mean, other than the hairstyles.
Yeah, well, the kind of sensibility that's going on with the massive shift of economics that's going on, like, there a lot of people are calling it the Great Resignation. So market forces, the pandemic, in the last couple of years, people have been pushed out of the normal economic cycles of you know, sort of early/late capitalism. I feel like we're moving to hyper inequality on one hand, and on the other hand, we're moving into the creative economy. So your work, again, is very resonant with everything from NFTs, and I'll walk you through why I think that. NFTs on over to sort of algorithmic narrative, linguistic frames of reference. One of the most popular things going right now is places like Meow Wolf, which is a very famous art installation spot that they took over a bowling alley and worked with the guy who wrote Game of Thrones, for example. But they did kind of theater like Meow Wolf, and there was another theater called Sleep No More, where you went through a series of rooms and it was theater, and people you couldn't tell who was an actor and who was in the audience. But these are wildly popular as theater. But to me, when I see the exhibition, you realize you've been dealing with both performance, literary theory, poetry, and how to dimensionalize these kinds of political tensions. And so right now, for our current moment, at least, the average person is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram. Most of these are now hyper weaponized platforms for your attention. And we're now in the attention economy. So people are being pulled away from their normal social engagements, and the power of words over them is monetized at every level. So it's when I walked into the room that we had the previous slide. By the way, just for the audience, these are vignettes of Laurie's performances. When you go out of that one other room, you go through this room, and it has mostly stills and photographs from Laurie's performances over the last several decades. Again, really powerful. And so that late 70s moment when New York, there was a kind of a collapse of the economy. A lot, I remember, Philip Glass was a taxi driver for a while, and that the building I had on Duane Street, next door was Richard Serra's building, and I guess they had let Philip stay there, and he paid rent by being a plumber, which again, this is maybe apocryphal, but and Elizabeth Murray, Bob Holman, Laurie Spiegel, these are all really wonderful people who had lived in that building. And then Your Space was up on Canal Street. Namjoon Pike had his studio in the area as well. But it seemed a lot less economic pressure. Like right now, because of the pandemic has really knocked the legs out from under a lot of issues about inequality. And so people are just trying to find other ways to create. And the rise of NFTs, the rise of all this sort of crazy digital art that has nothing to do with the metaverse, for example. These are all things that are on one hand they wouldn't be able to exist without the internet or the linguistic frames of reference that people use to create these fictional spaces. Which again, you were dealing with this with CD-ROMs, for example, which I'd love to ask you about too. To those in the audience who don't remember what a CD was, or CD-ROM, Laurie was again at a very important moment. She had done quite a bit of work in that field. Laurie, can we ask you about that? Do you want to riff on some of the early work with CD-ROMs?
Yeah. First of all, that room that we went in with all the cartoons, there was a kind of analog version of what the show was going to be originally, which was going to be almost half or a third VR, because I've been doing a lot of VR with my collaborator Shenchen Huang, who I also did the CD-ROM with. Yeah, so I thought, well, and in one of the works that we did called Chalk Room, you're in a virtual space like this, and I thought, what if I tried to paint a virtual space? So right now we're looking at a doorway that goes into that room, but it's passing through the moving imagery of one of the scenes from this work called Chalk Room. So Chalk Room was a VR piece that Shenchen and I did. And when you, I'll take it a couple of steps back because you wanted to talk about a CD-ROM. So we made a CD-ROM called Puppet Motel, also constructed like a series of rooms like these are. And it was, I'm attracted to, I mean, you're mentioning the bowling alley, both CD-ROMs and VR really come from the world of gaming. So I love that sense of game. And the ideal audience for the CD-ROM really was the people who are best at it, which are like 10-year-old boys. And so I was really happy that they enjoyed it and were really good at it, Everyone else is like, ugh. What I love about VR, I think, more than anything, and I just realized that like last month I was in Saudi Arabia. I was on the VR jury of a film festival there. And I realized what I love about VR. especially in the context of a film festival, when you watch a film, you're there, and if it's a good film, you like wake up at the end of the film, like, who am I? Where am I? Am I in a body, or you've been paralyzed? You're like, well, you're gone. You've left your body. VR, you need your body. You use it. You move through space. You look around you. You're kind of, what's back there? What's there? How do I feel? It is. I have to say, I really hope it's the future of visual imagery, because it's so close to theater and so close to having your mind and body collaborate in these crazy ways. I mean, I'm also love movies where you're paralyzed, but and it's all happening in your mind, of course. But VR. So this is a room that I made where you need your body to look. You actually are walking through a museum, and I wanted to make it like you're inside a comic book, and you're reading all these fragments and things. But so the CD-ROM that we made is no longer viewable by anyone. It had a lot to do with writing and storytelling and how you do that. So language was at its core, because it was it's at the core of all of this stuff, is how to tell a story. Even this work with habeas corpus is the story of one man versus the story of the US government version of his story. So it's always juxtaposing, looking at language in different layers. So the CD-ROM had one section in it which addresses writer's block. So it attempted to be useful, in some ways I like the utilitarian parts of making art, like is it going to help anybody to see that? So here you are, you've got writer's block. What are you going to do? So you just, like, the page paralyzes you, or the screen with a blink, blink cursor, just, you don't have any more ideas ever again, is making you crazy. So in this program, this was taking it from the opposite end. It would start, instead of starting with a blank page, it starts with a full page and a full novel. So it's a program in which you take Crime and Punishment, and you can slowly substitute your friends' names for the Russian names, your cities and places for the Russian places, your situations that you want to work with for the situations in Crime and Punishment. And pretty soon you have a really coherent novel, and you won't be able to see the template of Dostoevsky underneath it. I don't think, at least, in the experience we did. So there were these little kind of game-like things that were in that CD-ROM, which you can no longer see because it's no longer in a format. Anyway, it's gone. It's absolutely disappeared. Can you imagine, like, if paintings just erased themselves? They were just gone. Gone, like gone, never coming back. So you work on these things for a long time, and then they're just trade center gone, it's like evaporated.
Well, that's what I mean. There's a resonance between your work and Namjoon Paik, and that Namjoon Paik also, a lot of his work was based on relatively, these days, like vacuum tubes in the back of a TV. Most people wouldn't even know what that looks like. Or when you see half of Namjoon Paik's installations, they have to actually find where they can source the actual, circuits and other things that make his robots work, or other things like that. But CD-ROMs, for the audience, just they're essentially, it just stands for read-only memory, CD plus read-only memory. And Laurie's work was very resonant with that time, because you have to remember, we're in an era where platforms are king. But back in the 90s, when she was doing that, there was a lot of format wars. Nobody was quite sure. I mean, I remember when there was a big dispute between VHS and Beta, or and you can obviously see who won that. Now it's Netflix made, half of the normal, movie chains go out of business, and so on. So, but the archival moment that your poetry and relationships with that work still works for our time. I mean, someone like Mark Zuckerberg would be calling that the metaverse. But it's an eerie sensibility of how what you were doing as a poetry and as a kind of a performance art piece an entire pivot is going on with kids growing up trying to make NFTs, and people are selling virtual space in the metaverse. There's been a virtual gold rush. The other day I was reading about an 18-year-old kid who was making selfies as NFTs and made $26 million in like a couple of days. And then you get to cryptocurrencies, which again, I think there's a lot of resonance. I started to keep using that word resonance because I keep thinking about your work and everything from you've been involved with quantum physics, you've been involved with artificial intelligence, and how like generative engines. Brian Eno's very interested in that. And I remember you have a long relationship with Brian's work. So I'm grappling with the length of time because these are people in the audience. Just remember, I mean, she's been an incredible and powerful figure in digital media and performing arts for the last several decades. So to sort of zoom in on any particular thing, I like hearing, Laurie, if I could ask, there's one or two pieces in this in the retrospective / remix of your work where you deal with biographical material, your childhood, and there's a famous moment where I guess you were about to go swimming and you had an accident and ended up in the hospital, and they were reading stories to you, and you kind of had an allergic reaction to this incident. Can we unpack some of the earlier stuff that led you to how you started in the arts? Because I felt that was a kind of a fun childhood moment, or well, not so fun. It was an accident, but
let's go back to what you were saying about how technology influences work. Let's say in like the millisecond of the NFT, like a boom, or what happened with long form video, or what's happening now with you mentioned Netflix, for example. I think it's what's fascinating to me about stories now is that people are more interested in this long form thing. So, and especially the French are very, very good at these. It's no longer, well, the French New Wave was 85 minutes. Now the French are very, very good at these Balzacian unfurling of 80-hour stories, like A French Village or Call My Agent or something. You know, you saw these that are kind of soap opera like in structure, but it's a very different way of telling a story. And I think it's a very expansive, really interesting way, which really is, it comes from changes in the technology so that you can really then follow those things. You don't have to go to a movie theater every week to see it. You just tune in at your leisure to a very long story. So this is a story about a story that we're looking at right now, and it's two things. It's one is I wanted to again tell us movie in a kind of like film strip almost, because I used to make music out of film strips. When in the 70s I would like draw on film the score of the music, and those were, so they were flicker films that, and you would play them like, you know, so like it was like just experimental filmmaking, and we showed not even in the anthology film archives, just in various people's lofts. I mean, the film festival was 6 people in a loft looking at each other's films. This is this film strip on the floor is about this story. It's kind of a film through time, and it's projected from above. You can see the projectors there onto many copies of ripped up book of Crime and Punishment. Again, it's a Dostoevsky again, and it's the story of something from my childhood when I broke my back in a swimming pool accident. I thought I would just show off and like do a high dive from the pool. I'd never done a flip, but I thought that can't be that hard. So I just flipped off the board and I missed the pool. So I just broke my back, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital with doctors who said, "You're not going to walk again. Don't worry, but it'll just," and I was like, what idiots. This is the first time I thought adults are idiots. You know, I knew that so this was also a time when would come and read these super long stories to me. I was 12, about bunnies and adventures of rabbits and this kind of thing. I was reading, that was when I had first read Crime and Punishment. So these stories about the rabbits were like driving me crazy, but I couldn't talk and I couldn't move. So I was like, please stop. I just trying to
please stop
telling me about the gray rabbit. So, but anyway, this was my memory of that. And then what happened was I was getting some work on my back. So it never quite, got that back together as a back. I mean, it's a fine back, but anyway, somebody pressed on my back like that. I went, the body remembers everything. Your mind may forget, but the body does not forget. And that part of my body took me right back to the hospital in 1 second. In 1 second, I was like long ago in this long ago hospital. And I was in the part of the burn ward. So I was, because I was in traction, and so were all these other little kids in traction, and they were like swinging in these little swings so that they could be lowered into the liquid things with their burns, and they would scream all night. And I don't know why they just think, oh, put all the kids in the burn ward. They're not going to worry. They're out of it. So I was back in that place, could smell the way it smelled with this and hear that stuff. And I was like, I realized that the story I had been telling was the story I had made up about that time of the 12-year-old who thought adults were idiots. And actually, I had forgotten how utterly afraid I was of all of that and how I had just made up this story. I mean, you tell a story that you can tell, and that was a story I could tell about that. And so I would repeat that. That was the story about my going into the swimming pool and breaking my back and thinking adults were stupid. And I would tell that story, and I told it so many times that it became true. And that so this was about what happens when you tell a story too many times, and you just really remembering is forgetting. So that is a room right here that requires a lot of reading. There's generally this exhibition is not about a lot of reading, but here suddenly there's a room where this is a Bible right here, a 9,000-page document that I collaborated on with a supercomputer that I worked with in right before the pandemic. I was in Australia, and I was the artist in residence in Adelaide at the Machine Learning Institute. And I got to collaborate with this language supercomputer. And they said, welcome to the, whatever program. And what do you want to do with the supercomputer? And I was like, it's a supercomputer. Doesn't it have any ideas for, so anyway, I said, how about if we teach it to read the Bible? Because everyone's always banging on that book. That's what it says in the Bible. That's what it says. So I thought, okay, where did the Bible come from? The 3 streams of language, Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, let's put those on faders. So if you're reading a verse, now you can push up the Greek and you can see if it's all coming from the Greek, is that verse more rational? Then you pull that fader down. If you push if it's all in Hebrew, is it going to be more, let's say, mystical? No. So we did the algorithms that way. It was a little hard to, it was again, a little inconclusive, as a lot of things are. Then what they did was they put everything that I've ever said, written, sung, blabbed about into this supercomputer, and they crossed it with the Bible. And they sent a 9,000-page document, the Bible according to me, which was frightening because I recognized my voice, and I recognized, like, how I would say something, how I would compare it to something else, where I would pause, where I would just make a full stop, like it had my, let's say, style in it. It's open to which page is it? I'm not sure, but anyway, one of the, so in this Bible, I'm telling you with great confidence about the creation of the world, how that happened, what happened when man decided to have dominion, was given dominion over animals. Also described the fiery floods of the end of the world in Revelation. So anyway, I thought, okay, this is such interesting language. Now, half of it is really, really bad poetry, you know, like just like, oh, stop with the poetry. And then a quarter of it is pretty interesting, and a quarter of it is fantastic. So, like every writer, I'm an editor. Like, I mean, like everyone who writes is also like an editor. That's part of your job, you know. For, you know, I mean, maybe there's some Paul, are there some writers who just like write and they never edit? Do you think?
There are some novels there. It's like a kind of a continuous free form, like where the stream of consciousness stuff. I mean, one could argue Jack Kerouac, for example, who wrote On the Road on a whole pile of toilet paper.
Yeah.
Marquis de Sade, he wrote the Marquis de Sade was put in prison, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had to write on again like toilet paper.
Yeah.
So you just keep going with the roll, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's beautiful about yeah, you're I mean, there's a couple things I want to unpack with machine learning and language. Because language is a kind of a rule set, like you have to choose your tenses, your future, past tense, and so on.
Yes.
One of the beautiful things about the way that you've engaged, at least again, I feel is there's a degree of timelessness to a lot of the way that you approach language and storytelling. You're in this kind of ebb and flow where past, present, and future sort of blur. And I think if there was a consistent thread in the theme of how you move between performance, literature, and then dimensionalizing it with these installations or going to CD-ROMs, is a kind of a linguistic critique of time. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that, because time in our era, we felt that, okay, you know, it's linear, but then you get to quantum physics and you realize, okay, time is just a dimension. You know, we live in 4-dimensional, you know, 3 of space, 1 of time. But if you go up 1 dimension, you can really just see time. Einstein felt time was a simultaneous ocean, and you could just sort of dip in and dip out if you had the right technology, you know, depending on whatever your you know, dimensional access was. But there's a beauty to how I feel like that's a consistent theme to your work. Is that off? Or I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because language is such a powerful tool for you. And it's been like your DNA for a while, like I'd say from the beginning. Dreams, linguistics, and timeless, like floating between kind of how we frame the present with performance. Hopefully that makes sense. But
I like your use of DNA. It's a thing that seems very colorful and useful for you. It is for me too. I like, you know, what is the thing made of? What's the engine? Maybe it's a little abrupt to say this at this point, you know, but and maybe I should have mentioned it earlier, but I don't really think that we're here right now. So, you know, there's that. I don't know if you think that, but I have my doubts about whether we actually are. So, other than that, shifts of, I think of it more like tempo, probably. I think of it time more like music than like as an unfurling of end to end or beginning to end, or where are we in the pandemic? Everyone's like, we're in the middle of the pandemic here. What are you talking about? What is your way to chop it up? How are you chopping up time? And so I make a big effort not to chop it up, not to see it. and the music I like the most, like William Basinski, the time is gone. You know, that there is no time in that. And I feel then free. I'm not like, I mean, I like too once in a while, but because I like to dance, but I mostly like to try to feel free from time. So I know that sounds super pretentious to say, but it really is true. I mean, I try to write that way as well. Try to move through time zones, eras.
Okay, well,
Just play with it, you know.
yeah, I mean, the fun part about poetry, and especially the way you've engaged it, Nick, if you guys could fast forward, there was a couple slides. These are violins that she's recrafted and oversaw how each violin is a different approach to the technology that she's engaging. I don't know, hopefully the audience can see it if you, but there's again, a beautiful way of thinking about strings and tuning, which again goes to, from what I've been able to see, the artificial intelligence project with language in the Bible that you were working on, that's more of a recent work, but these violins are a little bit older. Do you have any thought? Do you want to comment on this one for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, that one on the right that has the black one is a Tapo violin from 1977, and those. And this is a perfect example of not being able to, of going back and forth. So that this is something I designed with Bob Bilecki, who I worked with on a lot of projects. There's a playback head on the violin and audio tape on the bow instead of horsehair, so that you can play it back and forth. And it really is about editing too. That's another violin now. That's a viophonograph, which is a different thing. It's just dropping a needle down onto a record. That instrument sounds really, really terrible. I mean, the one that is back and forth, the Tapo violin, I loved because it was about audio palindromes, and they were obviously, there it is with all its bows. God is always dog backwards. But in the world of sound, so I find it very musical to listen to things backwards and play them at different rates. And also when I was editing, I was playing the violin and editing the tape. So this is 2 reels where you rock the reels this way. When you play, you record, then you stop and you find the spot that you want to do by rocking the tape over the heads of the tape recorder, old school style. And I thought, and when I was playing and rocking, I was like, what is the same motion? I had to like build it, and it was similar to the Lindrum machine. Let's see what that little thing does, and if you can make it into one thing that is a different sort of, still has that same motion in it, still has the same logic in it. So back and forth thing. I did a bunch of things with orchestras with this one instrument. And believe me, it is not easy to convince people in orchestras to play this instrument. They're like, I have chops, sorry. I've practiced for 30 years and I do not want to waste it on your stupid instrument. And I was like, okay, I understand. I do, I really do. I love chops and I respect that, but I'm telling you, a lot of violinists think expression, I mean, chops are in the left hand, fast, and that the expression is in the right hand. So the way you bow is soft and then pushing and gliding, and all of these things that are in that right hand are exquisite. So I said, it's really hard to have this kind of control. I said, let's have a non-violinist play this thing and then have you play it. So the non-violinist had no control in it, and the violinist actually, all of that stuff that was in the hand, they were able to put in expressing tape going over a head. So you see how it's like, it's a different medium, but you still have it in your body, in your hand, and you're moving it into technology like that. So it was, they did that work, but it's every time I've worked with an orchestra, and I'm working with one now on a work called Amelia, and it is often a jam between a classically trained orchestra, and this is a big string orchestra, and then with the electronic stuff that I'm playing with them, and so they're like, it's these kind of two worlds coming together, and just find what they have in common is what I'm often dealing with.
No, I mean, it's really powerful. I mean, to the audience, you got to remember, these are really interesting instruments that Laurie kind of repurposed found materials from video, from phonographs, and so on. So there's a dimension of sculptural elements here. And I love the fact that we're in the middle of the Hirshhorn Museum here, because the architecture is, it's a bunch of circles. So when you go through the space, this is just one section, then you go around the curve and there's other materials. And then you go upstairs and there's a retrospective of Marcel Duchamp. You go downstairs, there's Barbara Kruger, et cetera. And the fun part about the way Laurie was just describing the bowing and the materials, and heartbreakingly so. I mean, right now we're of course, in the climate crisis. Like, if you think about the materials that made a Stradivarius, like the forest that made that wood is gone because of climate change. They've actually cut down all those trees. So you can never go back to that same physics of sound out of that wood. Whereas what Laurie's been doing is playing with both materials, with tuning systems, and different approaches to performance. And it's hard. I mean, I've seen a bunch of performances of the work over the years, and it's eerie because it's not every day that you have someone that's doing poetry, plus is a really talented musician, plus is also doing electronics, plus having installations, and plus being a really talented writer, to combine all of those together. Each of those could have just been one artist's career, like just one of them. So combining all of those it's very 21st century.
Yeah, I was really grateful to, I am really grateful to the Hirshhorn, because I come from a world, that's why all these walls are black. I come from a world that's dark, of like concerts and things in the dark, and it is not the white world of museums, of like white walls and let's light the things really well, and it's so that way of expressing visual art is I had to kind of fit into that. So working with the Marina Iskro, the curator there, and with the whole team, and Melissa Chu, the director, also, they gave me this opportunity to kind of like see what that world would be like in this world. So it was really an interesting challenge to see how but in the end, it's stories, ideas, sounds, and images. So museums look different now than they used to, and they're a little bit more free form, and not so much about here's this definitive work. In the painting room, I think we don't have any images of that room. Some of them were still wet, so I went in and I said, well, I was just going to touch around the side, and then at the end of that day, I had completely repainted one of the paintings, and this is my dream come true. Put a work in a museum, and then you can come in at night and keep working on it. That it's never really done. I haven't done that in this. I did it only at the beginning of this. It was really satisfying to be able to paint in a museum where it's going to be shown. So it was really fun.
Yeah, regretfully, I don't know if we have photographs of the paintings. Nick has control of the slides. Just to give the audience a little sensibility, Laurie, let me know if I'm crossing any boundaries here, but your studio is with Julian Schnabel's building. You have a section of that.
Across the street.
Oh, across the street.
Yeah.
And so Julian's an old friend, and you guys, I think, were painting together, or he was kind of riffing back and forth a little bit.
Wish we were, but yeah, he's my painting teacher, let's say.
Right. And I would love regretfully, to the audience, they're very charming paintings. They're sort of large scale works. You can imagine them, but they're online, and
Yeah, like,
that was one of the last rooms, and then you go around the curve, and then there's Marcel Duchamp and all sorts of other interesting. Barbara Kruger does an installation as well. It's a so Laurie, one like given the time frame of how we're looking at, we're in this era of weaponized information, misinformation, computational narrative. I'd love to unpack a little bit of the way you think about composing, because you're always kind of exploring both a solo work. Many times it's just you on stage with a violin and multimedia perhaps, or you sometimes work with orchestral materials. So Wagner coined the term Gesamtkunstwerk, total artwork. For the audience, Wagner is a very problematic guy, but he was also an architect and designed the opera house in Bayreuth, which is a beautiful opera house that many people consider to be the foundation of modern multimedia, because he would stage settings, the architecture, the voices of the actors. Laurie, I would love to hear your thoughts on where the near future is going, because given that many people, democracy and technology are in the middle of this huge collision course, and you're an artist who's navigated some of those terrains. Do you have any thoughts on the next couple of cycles of how multimedia is operating, or are you buying real estate in the metaverse maybe,
I still think you can make just amazing, daring, crazy work with a pencil. I have great respect for artists who are, whatever is, and I love working with pencils as well. I think that what I don't buy is the more tech it is, the better it is. I mean, you're just seeing so many of these giant shows where big things are moving around. You're going, wow, big technology is moving big things around. We're all supposed to go, whoa, because we're all supposed to love tech. One of the phrases that I put several times in this show, in the comic book, was a quote from a cryptographer who I just really love. And he said, if you think technology will solve your problems, you don't understand technology and you don't understand your problems. Right on, it's like, so we're asked to worship this stuff. We're asked because we're being asked to buy it, obviously. So we're supposed to go, wow, that art is like so like, whoa. Think of that. I mean, I'm a geek, so I love that kind of stuff too. I really do. But I think that I fool myself that just because it's big and technological, that it's any better than something done with a pencil at all. No, not at all. It's just another way to work. So this show is like a lot. It's very, as you can see. It's dedicated to Lou Reed and John Cage. And here's me and John in 1991. I went over to interview him for our Tricycle magazine. And we spent a lot of time really just doing what John liked to do, which is just listen to the traffic and talk about plants and, and also his incredible generosity was just really striking. This was when he was just a summer before he died. Now, a lot of old people, they get so crabby and bitter, like, I'm sick, I hate the work. He was not like that. He was always like, hey, it was almost, he reminded me of one of my very happy dogs. He was like, huh? Like, hey, like, listen to that. I mean, I thought, what is that kind of happiness? How did he achieve this incredible open happiness? And I mean, I believe that's what we're here for, is to experience that happiness and bliss. That's what this whole scene is about, so to see a person who had done that and was in that state was just like mind-blowing, who genuinely was, and who would just say, well, in terms of what's beautiful, he would, I hear something that I don't know. I think it's like not so great. And then I realized I just don't see it. Like, who taught you what beauty is? What are your rules for thinking that that's so good or so bad? You know, if you're in the NFT market, it's how much it costs, you know, because every NFT thing is followed by the amount it's sold for. So, you know, it's the market in material form, if you call it NFT material, which we might not. So anyway, it's with a lot of gratitude that I say that about John Cage, because the more I read about him, get a chance to think about what he was doing, the more radical he seems to me to be as an artist and as a thinker. I know that I think it was John Adams who said, you know, he wasn't so in love with Cage's music. I don't think he was such a good composer, but he was a magnificent philosopher. So, you know, when you're working with material, you know, sometimes other things other than the material come out. You know, sometimes the ideas are more in the foreground, and the sound of the idea is more muted. So really, in Cage's case, it's just so complex, you know. I just found it. I also like Everywhere's the Best Seat.
Yeah, I mean, it's, by the way, it's just a really life-affirming exhibition. I was really blown away. That image, hopefully the audience can see, it's Laurie and John Cage looking out the window. Amusingly enough, he also was one of the first composers for turntables. He has a piece called Imaginary Landscape, which is always one of my favorites. And I have a really rare vinyl of a collaboration he did with Sun Ra. Have you ever heard it? Yeah, they both got very nervous, and they met at Coney Island, or you know, Coney, whatever the beach is, and they were staring at each other with keyboards, and they both started sort of playing. Your piece reminds me, is again, I'm sorry to keep going back to this term resonance. I think everything is about resonance these days, because quantum physics, string theory, tuning systems, you know, ideas, and so on. But the power of this exhibition and the long-term kind of overview of the evolution of multimedia performance is something that's just really beautiful to see. Nick, there was one slide I think that we only have a couple of slides, so regretfully, to everybody in the audience, if you Google Laurie's piece Drum Dance, it's her with the drum machine. Some of the other materials, they're all on the website of the museum, so one way or the other, if you get a chance, highly recommend just doing a quick scroll through it. Laurie, I guess just from a perspective of composition, that's one thing you generally tend to, there's this whole scene of minimalism that was going on for a while, whether it be Meredith Monk, John Adams, who you mentioned as well. Do you have any schools of classical music that you kind of reference? Because I know that like lingers over your material a little bit, but you're mostly in a kind of electronic scene, but there's always an element of the classical kind of material, and of course your relationship with Philip Glass as well, and Brian Eno and so on. Do you want to riff on that for a moment?
Well, I mean, I was trained until 16 as a classical musician, so that's in the back. But I'm much more interested now, maybe in Shostakovich, for example. I mean, some of the filters that I'm building for violin have this really interesting kind of stacking of dissonance that I find. But if you play it in a way that's melodic, it's just like mind-blowing. So you're playing these really dissonant things that are just like, and you're like, what is that? So it doesn't easily fit into one thing or another. I just remember we were just talking just now that the original name of the show was Everything is Listening. And it was about, it was really about how visual and sound are always colliding, particularly in a really interesting experiment that was done with a group that was originally sort of associated with MIT and then broke off, but it was an experiment about creating algorithms for, okay, so there's a plant and you play a piece of music and the plant is microscopically moving, it's the sound waves are banging into the plant. So it's going like, it's dancing basically. It's responding to the bass, to the treble, all sorts of different ways. And then, so the idea is to record this visual motion and then translate it into sound. And so if you, in other words, you play a song, their great example is you play Mary Had a Little Lamb, which is Edison's first song, plant. And then with some tricky algorithms, you can play the visual back and translate it back into sound. And you will hear the plant singing. I thought, oh my God, this is just what I thought as a kid. I thought the whole room was listening to me. If I was crying and had a bad day, that I could cry in my pillow and my pillow would somehow remember it, or the curtains would remember it. Everything would remember. Everything was listening. And I thought, it's true. Everything is listening all the time. And so I thought, what if I could record, like play something and it would make somebody's. So, for example, I'm playing the violin in front of you, and the hair in your eyebrows is responding to those sounds. If I could record that hair and translate it back into sound, you would have that piece of music. This is what I'm going for.
I mean, there's a quantum physics effect there, which is called Schrodinger's paradox. Like when you observe something, you actually alter and perceive, your perception engages what they call collapse of the waveform function. So there's a very famous metaphor where it's like he puts a cat in a box and you're not sure if the cat is alive or dead until you open the box. And that became a kind of a very powerful critique of how people think about perception involving reality itself. And amusingly enough, Einstein was freaked out by this, and he said, "I'd like to think that the moon is existing without me having to look at the moon." And so Einstein eventually called this spooky action at a distance, where we weren't sure how we interact with something until we perceive it. To me, at least, the way that your work navigates both science, again, the more recent projects are about artificial intelligence, language, and generative materials. When I say generative, meaning like you're just talking about like being able to have these kind of pattern recognition processes and generate different poems and so on. Let's talk about some of the poets that have influenced you. I've always thought you might have a relationship to some of the early kind of expressions of like Vladimir Mayakovsky, the Russian poet, Velimir Klobzakovsky. He called himself the king of time. These are like Soviet era.
Time.
No,
well,
yeah.
I'll call
Do you have any kind of earlier poets that you kind of think about, or like maybe Walt Whitman? Is there any? There's so many different angles to think about how poetry informs the work too. Just I've always wanted to ask you that.
Oh, well, I'm a big fan of Rilke, I guess, and because of the imagery is so concrete, and I like that very much. For nature poems, I love Alice Oswald. Is one of my recent real favorites, just because her description of very simple cycles is very, very profound. So I find her really inspiring. Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm the longer narrative stuff I also like, but I've been upending my libraries, and it's really interesting to see. I mean, it's really chaotic right now. So there are like thousands and thousands of books in piles and some of the bigger piles are neuroscience, actually, and because I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah, how we see, how we perceive. Another big pile is, well, poetry is a pretty big pile. So considering they're all rather slim volumes, there aren't that many honking large poetry books. So I guess I've also been really interested in Chinese poetry lately, and so there's it's just kind of smattering. But we get to hear a poet at the end of this, right? Reading something.
Nick, I guess I also want to be respectful of time. It's 2:17. How are we for your time? Is everybody comfortable? I know we originally discussed an hour, but I just want to make sure that we're respectful of your time as well.
I'm always
Nick, do you want to
leave. I don't.
Okay.
I know I do have to, but
Okay.
everybody does get out and see what's happening in the snow bomb.
Should we open up to questions? Do you want to try that, or is
Okay.
I could hear you talk forever. I mean, it's
Likewise.
I've always wanted to ask one. All right, just before we open to questions, personally, I have a feeling that you've influenced many of our contemporary singers and songwriters who are thinking about multimedia and video. Everyone from Bjork to Grimes, perhaps Janelle Monáe, and so on. People who kind of combine this kind of performative mixed with the arts. Even bands like Sigur Rós. One of their guitar players, Jonesy, just had an exhibition at Tanya Benakdar Gallery. It was all like kind of tuning systems and like frequencies. You go in the gallery, but you also meditate a lot. And so maybe by way of closure, I'd love to ask you about how that informs some of your practice, because Björk, for example, says she's always been inspired by the ice landscapes of Iceland and how that influenced her. I've always felt that there's a little Laurie lingering over Björk. That's just sort of my, but how does meditation inform your practice? Maybe that's one of the last for me, and then we can open up to the audience, if that's okay.
Yeah, icy landscapes is nice. I mean, there's one, what I'm studying right now is a part of like a 10-week study of breath, and one of the images in this shows you the process of the mind to, let's say, the landscape, and the mind in this case rendered as a condor who is like flying above, and he's gotten so far above that he can glide, and he no longer has to do like this. He's gliding, and the landscape isn't, everything's sharp. The condor is sharp, the landscape is sharp. As you go through this series of meditations, the condor's face starts getting like more sketchy as you investigate the relationship of breath to mind to attention that you can pay, let's say in this case, to the icy landscape. By the end of this process, there is no more condor, but there's a lot of landscape. So the one who's looking is gone, but the landscape is super sharp. Super sharp. So I aspire to be gone, and that's what I try to do in meditation, and see the landscape very clearly, see it as clearly as I can. So I think I never saw the difference between meditation and being an artist ever. It's the same thing, exactly the same thing. You don't have to believe anything, which I really like. You not have to say you believe anything. You don't have to be utilitarian. You don't have to give people art that makes the world a better place. You don't have to do that. You're not obligated to do that. You just learn to see things as they are. So whatever that means, so, but particularly you don't have to, and I think this is really, this speaks a little bit to what's going on now. A lot of art is supposed to be irrelevant and is supposed to be helpful to people. I'm not on that page. I'm not on that page. Secretly, I am. Secretly, I hope to be useful. But if I started out thinking that I'm going to say something useful and correct, it just makes everything shut down in my whole mind. You know, because that's for billboards, you know, and that's for you know, important things that we need in terms of morality and behavior. Those are really important things, but that has nothing to do with art. Zero.
Okay. I love the fact that you say the term zero. Amusingly enough, I'm actually writing a book called Digital Fictions, The Future of Storytelling. And one of my favorite moments in history is the way the Indians, mainly in Sanskrit, invented well, they didn't invent it, they were able to represent zero. Like when you think of the circular motion of zero, there's a famous moment where Einstein meets a very renowned Indian poet, Rabindranath Tagore, and they were backstage at the Nobel Prize Awards, and Einstein was nervous. And when he would get nervous, he would go play violin. He was actually quite a talented violinist. There's actually bits of him playing violin on like YouTube and so on. But so Rabindranath Tagore says to him, your Western music, you guys have zero. And that's why your tuning systems are all too simple. Like in India, we had microtones, we had all these kinds of, you ever hear Indian Carnatic music or Hindustani music, the tuning systems are far more granular. So when I love the fact that you just said zero, and that's made me think about this kind of debate between Einstein and Tagore about zero. They became very good friends, and they wrote a book together called On the Nature of Reality, where you have a poet talking to one of the world's leading physicists. It's a great book if you ever have a long flight. So Einstein begins to talk about the poetics of physics, and then the Indian poet begins to kind of insert the history of zero in Indian culture and how it relates to the conversation. One of the oldest temples in the world that has Hindu kind of practices is a temple where they have zero, and it's in this area called Chhattisgarh. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. It's a temple kind of dedicated to zero, or it has you go in a room and there's a zero carved in a wall, and that's
beautiful. I'm looking forward to that book. When is that going to be out?
Oh, it's out. I'll send you a link.
It's out already.
It's called, my book. I'm working on it.
Your book.
That's why I'm out here kind of just writing. Algorithms. There's so many ways that this is resonant with what you're up to. So we'll make sure to check in with that. So do you have any all right, audience-wise, Nick and Brooklyn Rail crew, do you guys want to? How do we do this?
Yes. I could also listen to you both talk for hours and hours and hours more. We've received so many wonderful questions in the chat. I think we'll have, for the sake of time, we can take a handful. I'm first going to pass the mic over to our friend Bob Holman. Bob, you should be able to turn on your mic now.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry, very sorry, Laurie, but it was a utilitarian talk that you and Paul put.
Okay. All right.
It lifted us. I'm speaking for everybody again, is happy. We is happy. And as far as Stop the Poetry, I think it just flows from you. I wanted.
I'm going to be right back. I can hear you, but I'm going to be right back.
I'm going to talk to Paul for a minute, if that's okay. Paul, the thing about Velimir Klebnikov is that while he was called the president of, the king of time, he really declared himself to be the president of the world. But he said that everybody is the president of the world. So that's great. Now that we're all presidents, we can make all the laws. And don't forget that his great super saga, Zangezi, starts off with him writing bird songs down in text and having the actors perform them, which is my segue over to Kamau Brathwaite, because when you guys were talking about orality, text, and digital, the three consciousnesses, Kamau Brathwaite, the Barbadian poet, was doing this back in the 60s, and he did a book with Nathaniel Mackey, another guy who's really able to get the text, orality into the text. So that's, I guess, my question is why that Heart of a Dog isn't on Netflix. Is that Archie does get listed in the IMDb as one of the great actors. Really and truly, it was so great when you did the when you reversed the dog into God here, and or was it vice versa, Laurie?
It's the same. They just go back and forth, you know.
Sounds like a violin bow to me.
It's so nice to see you, Bob.
Thanks for the shout out, Paul.
Yeah, well, you guys, I mean, I think all of us are within a couple of blocks of one another.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, although I'm never I'm usually normal times, I'm not in New York very much. Laura, I go jogging on the West Side Highway, and I know I sometimes jog past your building. And during the beginning of the pandemic, Tribeca turned into this crazy ghost town. And often my light would be the only light on my block on Duane Street. And there was one moment where you were jogging down Canal Street, literally in the middle of the street with no traffic because of the pandemic. And then I remember, oh yeah, that's Laurie's building. And it's Bob, you used to be, 173 Duane with Elizabeth Murray, wonderful painter. And I sometimes see Laurie Spiegel feeding the pigeons still, like she, she has a flock of pigeons that she talks to. Laurie, if you ever want to see, she's a huge fan of you. You guys have probably known each other for a long time.
We do, yeah.
And you see Laurie regular like clockwork going out and throwing these seeds at the birds, and the birds land on her, and then she's talking to them. And I was like, this is definitely one of those beautiful moments in Tribeca.
I saw a food emporium once, and a woman walked past her and said to her friend, "Everybody's trying to look like Laurie Anderson these days."
There's a really nice film that's just out that has some great things about Laurie Spiegel in it, and it's called Sisters with Transistors. It's the greatest film because here's an untold story. It's like my life story of going around in the 70s and 80s to music festivals in Europe, and it was so many women making electronic music. Now that's not a story that anybody knows. Now finally, it was like Eliane Radic, Laurie Spiegel. I mean, there's so many people doing that. Until this film came out, it's been out, I guess, almost a year now, called Sisters with Transistors, the story of women and electronics. And it's a, how you can just think you know what's going on, and then you see a film like this and you go, whoa, there was all of this incredible excitement and invention going on that women were doing with electronics. And I didn't know all those things. I got drafted in at the last second to be the narrator of this film, and I was kind of blown away at the whole history. I mean, had been part of that, but I'd never heard anybody tell the story. You know, you can live your life and you don't think it's a story that anybody else knows. You just have it in your past, and then suddenly somebody goes, "There's a story of women in electronics," and you're like, "Oh, it's my story."
Actually, Laurie's in the audience. Hey, Laurie. I don't know. She just did a little. But yeah, it's a brilliant film, by the way.
Yeah, it's really.
And Laurie Spiegel's loft has incredible, crazy old school computers and keyboards and.
So great. Yeah.
And it's a really good film. And I miss Paulina Oliveros. I mean, wow, she was so many great people doing work. So Nick, I don't want to, this is now the audience time. So anybody in the audience, Bob, great to see you. Laurie, Spiegel, by the way, not Laurie, but Laurie Spiegel, good to see you too. If anybody, you guys, Nick and crew, you guys, it's up, the ball's in your court there.
Totally. Thank you. And I'd like to ask a question on behalf of a few people that have asked a similar question, including Chuck Smith and Ross Lippman and a few others. But on behalf of a few audience members, Laurie, if you could maybe follow up on if you or we are not here, where do you think we are?
Everywhere. Did you see that Thich Nhat Hanh he said, don't, all his students, when he died, they said, we want to make a monument for you. And he was like, no, don't do that. And he said, and they said, no, we really want to make a monument. He said, okay, make a monument for me. But on the monument, it has to say, I am not here. So I think we're in my own personal belief system, which we're here everywhere, always.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much. I think we have time maybe just for a couple more questions. I want to thank everyone in the audience for asking so many wonderful questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to pass the mic now over to Kara Brownell. Kara, you should be able to turn your microphone on now.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm eating my lunch.
Bon appetit.
Yeah, I was curious to know if you ever worked with Pauline Oliveros.
Yes, I have. And Pauline and I were artists in residence at Impact, which is a place up near Troy in
Yes.
Rensselaer. Yeah. And we were I really loved Pauline very much. And we had done some little concerts together. We decided to do a concert at Impact. And the whole time I had a lot of technical problems at that moment. And I couldn't get anything, nothing to work. And she just did the whole concert and never even mentioned it. Another time she said, I'm going to give a talk and I'm going to get you a ticket because it's like, I am so chuffed about this idea that I'm going to do in the event. And it's, so I'll make sure that you can get in. I was like, okay, I'll be there. So I got there and I got to the theater and the theater was closed. I was no one there. And I was like, whoa, I have the day wrong or something. And then I thought, no, I have the day right. And then I went up to her office. There's a light under the door and Pauline, and I said, I'm sorry, I got the day wrong. She said, no, you didn't get the day wrong. It's like, I said, what happened to the concert? She said, well, nobody came, but I am so chuffed about this idea. Let me just show you what it was going to be. And she did the whole concert for me in her office. And I was like, I thought, I want to be like that person, really chuffed, no matter what. So I just realized I have to be somewhere in about 10 minutes. But I do like to be the last person to leave a party that, if there's something else we should do. I wanted to hear that poem.
Absolutely. No, yes, I do. Yeah, well, I want to, before we do that, I do want to pass the mic to the Rail's own Phong H. Bui. Phong, would you like to ask our last question of the day?
I'm sure there must be tons of questions, but I know that Laurie is eager to hear the poet read, so I won't keep it long, Laurie. Thank you so much. Your show at Mass Mocha was also phenomenal. It was so inspiring before this undertaking huge retrospectives. We all eager to go to see. Thank you, Paul, for all the thoughtful question. The other night I couldn't sleep, Laurie, so I tuned in your Spending the War Without You, your Charles Eliot Norton lecture. And I was laughing out loud because there was someone mistaking you for Laurie Anderson, the actress. And so incorporate that into your own talk. It was so brilliant. And I couldn't help it but thinking of the famous lunch at 10 Downing. That must have been in 1944 when Churchill somehow was hosting this huge lunch. Everyone was there, his important dignitary, the chief imperial general staff, and Alan Brooke and everyone else. I think Lady Churchill was there. And then the host was Irving Berlin, who was there because he had just had this sold out musical. This is the army, I think it's called, that really all the proceeds went to support the funding for the Allied army. So the whole time, during the whole time, Churchill kept asking him about, whether Roosevelt would run for the fourth time, would he have a good chance of re-election, and about everything else in between, about war, the sentiments, political sentiment in the U.S. And Irving, Berlin answer was rather impoverished, general, sort of timid and not that eloquent. In the end, Churchill was vastly disappointed. So he turned one of his aides and said, the typical professor, they wrote beautiful in writing, but in person, they're disastrously boring. It turned out that the wrong Berlin. He was meant to be Sir Isaiah Berlin, not Irving Berlin. Oh my God.
That's crazy. I love it.
I know, I did too, because I did ask him when I did manage to meet Sir Isaiah Berlin.
Yeah.
A great friend of my Shapiro. And he was hired at the time by Churchill, by the British intelligence agency. So he was teaching at Beaumont College, and back and forth in DC. And of course, in 1965, I think, he delivered amazing 5 lectures. Part of the Mellon lecture is called The Roots of Romanticism.
Beautiful title.
Amazing history of the whole entire 5 lecture, which I listened to the whole thing. He gave me the original tape recording, so I have it. It's really a basis of the rail, really, Laurie. But why I'm thinking about that Pacific incident, partly because Berlin became super famous by 1977, when the famous essay, which he initially written in 1953, is called The Hedgehog and the Fox.
Right.
It's one of the great classics that went viral when it published. In that book is called Russian Thinker by Viking Press, which rocked the academic world.
Yeah.
Became their Bible, so to speak. And the reason why I'm thinking about this, because it's based on a Greek poet, Achilocus, a line that say the fox might know many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. So it was the first analysis or study, even though he admitted later it was an intellectual game. But everyone in the academy took it so seriously because it was the first attempt to analyze the 2 different kind of artistic intellectual temperaments.
Yeah.
Those who can conceive everything in the world, but had to filter through one single lens or vision. And that would be the hedgehog. Whereas to whom the world cannot boil down in one singular reading. And, so that he went on to enumerate, like give different example of philosopher, writer and whatnot. Like the hedgehog would be Plato, Lucretius, Dante, go all the way down to Ibsen, Proust, or, somewhere in between, or even, I would say Dostoevsky, whereas the fox would be the opposite, would be like Hegel or Pascal, or actually Erasmus or Shakespeare, rather, all the way to Joyce or Balzac, or of course Tolstoy,
Yeah.
My question is very simple. When you came to New York, in the early 70s, according to many interviews we have done, whether with Jonas Makers, I love our first interview with Judith Malina.
Yeah.
Super broken, poor, still doing living street theater in Italy. We interviewed her in the 2nd issue of the Rail 2002.
Nice.
So my question is this: when we try to describe John Jonas, it was a disaster, because in the end, after my having introduced Jonas, a George artist, the performer, filmmaker, and all of that, and she said, please just call me an artist, call me an artist.
Yeah.
bohemian artist you like. So the point is, I'm not asking you whether you would be the perfect hedgehog or the aspiring fox. But since you...
That's a relief.
I
Because
know. Yeah, I know.
yeah, that's a complicated and really interesting distinction, how your mind works. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. But it's a political one, you know, Laurie. It's political one because
Also,
yeah, I believe so, because the way that, you know, the notion of liberal hegemony, you know, the sweeping imperialist idea of spreading the democracy, misreading George Kennan policy of containment, you know, how to deal with Russia, how to deal with China and whatnot. We all remember the Great Society policy of LBJ. It never really turned out anything. But in your own temperament as an artist, you know, you are so open. I love your interview with Cage too in Tricycle magazine. I read years ago. How, you know, to be open, it requires certain stamina and deep curiosity about things. You know, I did ask the same question. I remember in 2006 when I asked Richard Serra at the tail end, are you a hedgehog or the fox? After having sort of briefed through my summary of Berlin's famous essay, he said to me, well, you decide, what do you think? And I said, well, you're a hedgehog, but it's not quite true, Laurie, because Richard, who became Richard, I would easily argue without the early being exposed to that incredible bohemian world that we admire so much, where you came to New York for a reason, why I came to New York, all these young people aspire to come to New York for the same reason, without the experimental film, without having lived with John Jonas and being exposed to the Justin Church dance. I think Richard work as a sculptor wouldn't be possible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I,
we're really part of our milieu for sure. We learn from each other. And if I had to answer the hedgehog and fox question, I would just be the one who's over there wondering who the fox and the hedgehog are. That's who I would be.
cool. That's what Tolstoy say. Tolstoy say, I might be the fox, but I aspire to be the hedgehog.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Thank
you.
you, Laurie.
Thank you so much for asking me to be part of this. It's really a cool thing that you're doing. It's so great to meet other artists and talk. It's the best.
Well, we can't wait to see the show. Can't wait to see the show. Thank you, Paul.
So hey, Fong, before we go, I just want to say, Laurie, just to thank you, because these are very bleak times, and I think that sometimes we forget the crisis of democracy that we're facing is about manipulation of information, manipulation of language. You know, and Bertolt Brecht's one of my favorite artists. I've always viewed you in the same resonance of political mixed with theater, mixed with you know, wit, charm, but above all, life affirming. And so I just want to say thank you for joining us. And Fong, you know, always good to see you. We have the same haircut these days, you know, so. But Laurie, you know, one way or the other, thank you for the work and the show. To the whole audience out there, I highly recommend going. It's a very life affirming show in the middle of this kind of beginning of World War III, maybe, who knows? But Laurie, thank you for the work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laurie.
Yes.
What would be called cosmic optimism?
You know, I just have one thing to say about optimism.
Yeah.
It's a choice, you know, and I only choose to be I'm a natural pessimist, but I chose to be an optimist because you will have a better life if you're an optimist. I highly recommend just deciding you're an optimist. That will make a better life. That's my utilitarian part of this. That's it.
That's what we call Jesus Buddha. Thank you, Laurie.
I couldn't think of a more perfect kind of concluding statement. And thank you, Laurie, for joining us today and for your generosity of time here. But as we have said, we do conclude all of our events with a tradition with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate, Charles Theonia, to the stage. Charles Theonia is a poet, teacher, enthusiast, and transsexual without direction. They are the author of artist book Saul Palmettos from Container 2018 and chapbook Which One is the Bridge from Topside Press in 2015. So Charles, over to you.
Thank you so much, Laurie and Paul, for this conversation. I'm going to read one poem. I'm putting it in the chat in case anyone likes to read along. I wrote it in response to Pauline Oliveras' deep listening questions. So I wanted to bring her back in. And as a heads up, it has some subway harassment in it, but there's also some nice stuff too. Are you hearing it now? After movement, rejoining the still. Breath catches in the particulars. Little snores mean you haven't died in your sleep. Rain that touches everything. Yes, now. On shore, we praise the iconic intro of Dance with Somebody, East River Cruise Boat Party, our ears auto-filled. It was girls just want to have fun. On the rocks, cops hassle girls with beer cans. We watch till they move on. Something's swelling, warning in the water. A man too close, looking too much, whatever that sounds like. Amygdala firing sounds like, oh fuck. Subway jackhammer panic, my pulse with it. I don't hear with bluebells my peripherals, but other sounds that probably not or probably shoulder me on the train, mutter, why you standing there, faggot? Instead of screaming wordlessly or pulling out your dick, our sleeping shoulders. But if it would or were that, hand sliding down pole, stepping off to allow. If instead, when I get to what are we willing to give up if we gets bigger for real, the real Whitney key change lifts me up to meet it. Souffing, little frogs, purring, wind shivers, fur brushing fur. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you for concluding today's conversation with that wonderful poem. I once again, I just want to thank Laurie, Paul, everyone that has joined so much for today's event. This has been a really magical time with you all. I also would like to thank Melissa, Marina, Kate, and the extended team at the Hirshhorn for helping to make today's event possible. And we encourage everyone to go see the show. It is open through July 31st of this year in Washington, D.C. at the Hirshhorn Museum. We also encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we will upload today's conversation shortly. And join us on Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Esther Kloss and Tom McGlynn on the occasion of Kloss's exhibition at Peter Bloom Gallery. We will conclude with a poetry reading by Abigail Wellhouse. You can now all turn on your microphones to say hello and goodbye. And I hope you all stay safe and well in the weather. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Thank
Laurie.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Bye,
tuning in.
everybody.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Love you all. Be safe.
Take care,
All right,
everyone.
have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Bye.